Hey, I am Dave, the owner and founder of the Disc Golf Dyers Guild, and today I'm going to show you how easy it is to dye a disc using the clear glue bed method. Now, I don't claim to be an expert at this, but I have learned a lot from other disc dyers, teaching a lot of classes and making a lot of mistakes. Luckily for you, the Dyers Guild has assembled all this resource and information into one spot so you don't have to make those costly mistakes. Yes, you will make mistakes and that's how you learn, but we're trying to reduce those mistakes so you learn faster and expedite your dyeing process so you have an amazing looking disc. So check out the Dyers Guild website for amazing masterclasses, live clinics, and anything disc dyeing that you could ever want. Plus, we've assembled a bunch of dye and supplies and kits for you. These kits are everything you need to get started disc dyeing today, such as this. So you don't have to go out and assemble and find each individual piece. We have everything in one spot for you in these wonderful kits. Alright, now let's get started and I'm going to show you what is needed to dye a disc using the clear glue bed method. First and foremost, in the name clear glue, we're going to be using clear glue. Now, there are many different types of clear glue and it's really up to a personal preference of what you want to use. Some glue is thicker than others, some is thinner than others, and you can even water down the glue to make it a thinner consistency to manipulate the bed easier. You can check out all the different types of glue that works on the Dyers Guild website. So if you go to dyersguild.co/supplies, you will find that. The next most important thing is the dye. We're going to be using a dye mixture that is acetone and powder dye. If you haven't seen the video of how to create these dye mixtures, I will have a link in the video description below. The next item that we have on our list are these pipettes. These pipettes will be used to take the dye and put it onto the bed. The container that will hold the clear glue bed is this metal pie pan. Now I've pre-lined it with press and seal for easier cleanup. Now you don't necessarily need it, but it makes cleanup a little bit easier. I also have a straw so I can blow and manipulate the dye on top of the glue bed to get some very interesting patterns. I also have a toothpick so I can drag it around to create some more patterns as well. The other tool that I have that you don't necessarily need is a torch. This torch will pop any air bubbles within the clear glue. And I have a white dyeable disc. Now you got to make sure that the disc is dyeable. You can check out the dye accessibility chart on the Dyers Guild website. We'll have a link below. Not all plastic takes dye. The rule of thumb is if it's glossy and shiny, it'll take dye. But if it is matte, like say your base putter plastic, that does not take dye very well. So definitely go check out the dye accessibility chart to see if your discs are dyeable, or when you're about to buy a disc to make sure you get the proper disc that you can dye. And the last on the list is isopropyl alcohol. We're going to use this to clean the disc because from the disc manufacturer they have a silicone release agent to help the plastic release from the mold, and we want to get that off as much as we can because the dye does not like to adhere or go to the disc with that silicone release agent on there. And if you're using use this just cleaning all the dirt to make sure we have a nice clean work surface on the disc so that the dye actually goes into the disc. Now to give you a little background of how disc dyeing works. Unlike painting where it adds a thickness to the surface, this dye actually permeates within the plastic of the disc. Now that makes it PDGA legal because it doesn't add any thickness or any noticeable weight. And there's multiple ways you can apply dye, but again, we're going to be doing the clear glue bed method. And how this works is we're going to be using the clear glue bed as basically the bed that is going to hold the dye. So the glue will be on the bottom and the dye will basically just rest on top of the clear glue bed. Then we'll place the disc on top of there, which the clear glue bed sandwiches the dye between the disc. And that's how the dye gets on the disc. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to take our disc and we're going to clean it with the isopropyl alcohol. And I like to liberally apply a bunch of the isopropyl alcohol on a paper towel. You just want to get any surface that you're going to dye as clean as possible. You don't have to scrub too hard, and make sure not to scrub too hard, or if you have something that, I don't know, isn't a cotton swab or a paper towel, because if you do scrub too hard, you can scratch the disc. And we're using a blank disc so we don't have to worry about a stamp. We'll tell you more about how to remove stamps and how to deal with stamps and use them in creative ways in other videos. I like to spin dye after each dye, so I also make sure I get the rim of the disc nice and clean as well. Now we got the disc nice and clean, we're going to add the clear glue bed to the pan. you want to be careful because you can induce or create air bubbles when you actually pour it in the pan. You want to think of it as like pouring a beer, where you don't want to get a foamy head and try to reduce the bubbles as much as possible. And what I like to do is I like to pour it in from the side to reduce as much air bubbles as possible and have it as close to the pan as possible so you're not getting air bubbles as well. Now, how much you need depends on a few factors. How domey is your disc and how big is the pan or surface that you have to work with. You don't need a whole lot of glue. You just need enough glue so that if you have like a really domey disc, that it doesn't bottom out and hit the bottom of the pan. If you have a really flat or shallow disc, you really don't need much glue at all, like an eighth or a quarter of an inch. So I can see a few air bubbles. Now, there's a few things that you can do. You can let the glue sit and let the air bubbles pop on their own. You can tap the pan to try to get out the air bubbles, or you can use heat to pop the surface bubbles. Now, some people like bubbles, some people don't like bubbles. It can create an interesting effect, or you might not want it in the design, so you want to try to get as many bubbles out as possible. And I'm going to use a little bit of heat. Please be careful if you use an open flame or heat. We're using acetone dyes, and acetone is extremely flammable. So if you do use heat, make sure your lids are closed or you have the dye away from what you're doing, because it can start on fire. You can apply heat after you lay down the dye, but you have to make sure that the acetone has evaporated from the dye before you apply the heat, otherwise your bed will start on fire. Ask me how I know. Very bad. Now that we have the base clear glue down, we're going to be adding our dye. So I'm going to open up our dye bottles here, and I have this nice handy dandy little caddy that I like to use that I 3D printed that you can also find on our store. It works wonderfully well with these 2-ounce bottles that we have. When choosing your colors, you really have to use the color wheel and think of what colors will work well together and what colors won't, because you do have the potential to create brown. I've chosen the 3 primary colors, so we should be pretty safe here. We have yellow, red, blue, and I also have black. I like to use black as a separator between these colors to add a little bit more definition. If this is your first time ever using a pipette and the dye and the glue method here, I would recommend grabbing some dye and dropping it within the container to see how fast the drops go and how hard you need to actually squeeze the pipette. And when you are grabbing the dye, make sure you grab from the very top of the bottle and not the bottom, because we want to make sure not to grab any of that extra dye sediment that is on the bottom, which can show up in the clear glue. And the most important thing that you want to make sure is, please keep the pipettes vertical. I'm going to repeat that again. Just like a claw machine, keep the pipettes vertical, because if you tilt it to the side, which is very natural to do, is air will get in there and all the dye that is in there will come out. Ask me how I know. I've had students do this and I've done this myself, so please, again, like a claw machine, go up, over, and down. So now this is where your creativity comes in. You can do basically any pattern that your imagination comes up with. I'm going to show you one, and I'm also going to put a link in the description of a bunch of different patterns to help inspire you to get some ideas. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a ring pattern. So I'm going to lay one color around a ring, then I'm going to add a little bit of black, then I'm going to do another color, a little bit of black, then I'm going to do another color. So I'm going to do rings of color. And the first color that I'm going to do is I'm going to do blue. In this case, it is Sonic Blue. When you lay the dye in the bed, have the pipette pretty close to the bed, but make sure you don't have the pipette actually touch the glue, because that will not be good. It'll kind of taint the pipette and you don't want to put that back into the bottle. And you don't need a whole lot of dye. Basically 1 layer of dye, 2 at the very most, will get enough saturation you need. So I'm just taking my time here, going around in the circle. I just want to make sure that I got the very edges, so I'm just going to go around a little bit there. Just like a claw machine, go back, put it in there. If you don't want the dye to mix, let it sit for a while and let the acetone evaporate, just leaving the dye onto the bed. That will kind of harden it up a little bit so the dye won't mix as much. But if you do want the colors to mix, you'll have to do it pretty fast and lay it down pretty fast. It takes about 10 to 15 seconds for the acetone to evaporate. So again, you gotta work fast if you want it to mix together. Let it sit if you don't want it to mix as much. Different colors behave differently, so you'll have to learn what colors do what. Some colors like to spread more than others. Some colors like to stay in one spot. The next color that I'm going to do is I'm going to add just a little bit of black, and a dab will do you. You do not need a whole lot of black. And again, I like to use black as a separator color between the different colors. And the other thing to note is layering the dye doesn't do a whole lot, so you don't necessarily want to layer colors on top of each other if you can help it. The next color that I'm going to do is red. In this case, it is blood red. And I'm just going to do another ring of color. Just taking my time. And when the dye drops, you can see how it spreads and it does its thing. The other thing that I want to show you is using a straw is another way to manipulate the bed. If you want a line of colors to be tighter, or if you want to move dye around, you just blow in there. And feel free to move and twist the bed to get better angles. If you do have a lazy Susan, that works really well. So what I was trying to do there is I wanted to get red a little bit of a tighter line. Next, I'm going to do a little bit of black again to create some separation. Again, it is optional. You don't need to, but I like it. And I'm going to let that evaporate a little bit. Try to make sure to work on an even surface. If you're not on an even surface, the bed can shift, but you can also move the pie pan or whatever your bed is in and prop it up to make it level. And you can adjust where things are with that, which in this case, I'm going to prop it up just a little bit. All right, and the last color that I'm going to add is yellow, which I'm using Dandelion. All right, I'm pretty happy with how I laid that dye down. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to manipulate the bed in a unique pattern. Your imagination is a limit. This is what I like to do with this type of glue bed and pattern is I'm going to be taking a toothpick and dragging it along the glue bed. I'm going to be doing two different patterns in here. The first pattern that I'm going to do is I'm going to be doing a star pattern going back and forth from the center to the outside. I want to make sure I go to completely the outside to completely to the center. And I do not lift my toothpick out of the bed while I do this. So I'm going to start from the center and just keep going back and forth. I like to do nice tight lines so I have them relatively close to each other, and try not to necessarily drag the pointy toothpick on the bottom of the pan, especially if you have press and seal, you can tear it. But as you can see, the toothpick drags the dye together and creates these nice patterns. And you can even leave it at there if you like this flower star type of pattern. The other thing that I like to do is I like to go in a circular pattern. So I'm gonna work my way from the outside and slowly keep going towards the center in a spiral pattern until I am in the center. And again, I like to get nice, tight, wispy lines. I think that pattern looks really cool. And there we go. This is our finished pattern. And again, you can move the bed around to shift the bed to center it or whatever you need to do. If for whatever reason you still see some air bubbles, you can take the heat again and quickly go over it. But again, make sure the acetone is completely evaporated, and if you do have dye, move it away from the open flames so you don't set anything on fire. Please, do not set anything on fire. But I'm gonna quickly add some heat to here to pop some of the bubbles that I see. All right, the bed is ready, and now we are ready to add the disc. If you have a domey disc, it's not as critical, but if you have a really flat disc, you wanna make sure not to put it down flat. You wanna put it in at a slight angle. And when I put it down, I like to grab the disc with 3 fingers, or you can even grab it with your thumb, or if you want, you can create some tape handles. But in this case, I like to grab it with 3 fingers on the rim, and I like to go at a slight angle. And when I go down, as soon as it touches, I really don't put any pressure. I just let it slowly roll in to make sure that there is no air bubble pockets underneath there on the bed. I'm gonna go ahead and place the disc. Again, slowly let it touch the bed. And I'm not going to put any pressure. I'm just going to let the weight of the disc slowly roll in. And this is about the speed that you want to go. You want to take it nice and easy to make sure that no air bubbles get trapped under the disc. And once the disc touches the clear glue, it is basically there and it's not going to shift or move around. The dye pattern that you put on there will stay there. The clear glue sandwiched the dye between the disc, so it's not going anywhere. I like to push down ever so slightly to make sure that it gets to the rim of the disc so it is fully dyed. And there you go, you've basically dyed a disc. Now, there are 2 ways you can do this. You can let this sit at room temperature for 12 to 24 hours if you don't have any heat. But if you do have access to a heat lamp, or even better, a dehydrator, This process will go so much faster. We use our dehydrator and we have the disc at 125 degrees, and 45 minutes is all we do for that. So we put it in the dehydrator for 45 minutes, take it out, clean it off, and it is fully saturated. So heat is your friend. What heat does is it opens up the pores of the plastic to accept the dye faster. If you don't have heat, that just takes a little bit longer, but it does still work. I'm gonna set this in the dehydrator and we'll come back in 45 minutes to see the results. I just pulled the disc from the dehydrator and I let it sit for about a couple minutes so I can actually handle it. Now, the next thing that we want to do is pull the disc out of the bed, and we want to scrape off as much glue as we can. After we scrape as much glue off as we can, we'll rinse it in the sink. And we want to make sure to get as much glue off as possible because it is not good to have glue go down your drain or sink. It can clog your pipes. To scrape the glue off, you can use really anything that you want. You can use an old piece of cardboard. You can use the squeegee tool that we have provided in our kits, or you can use a credit card. Just make sure you're not going to be using it anytime soon. When I pulled the disc, I like to lift one end up. The glue does like to dry on the edges, so it may be a little bit sticky to pull up, but it should be relatively easy. Then again, you want to scrape off as much glue as you can. Now I'm going to go rinse it in the sink and I'll be right back. All right, I just got back from scrubbing this in the sink with some soap and water, and I really made sure to scrub the edges because the glue likes to dry and harden around the edges. You can scrub softly with a sponge, magic eraser, or paper towel to get all that goop off. But there you go, you've dyed your first disc. And to make things easier, if you want to dye something like this, we have all the dyes and supplies and kits on the Dyers Guild website. So check that out. Again, we have the kits to do this exact thing, so you don't need to source materials from multiple websites. We have a nice all-in-one kit for you. And I really love doing clear glue beds because you get amazing results very easy, and it is very hard to mess up. And that's why I like to teach the clear glue method for our classes. Because with our classes, it is basically people who have never dyed a disc and they get amazing results. So I have confidence in you that you can create something like this or even something better. If you're new at disc dyeing or a seasoned expert, I would still love to see every disc that you create. If you go on Instagram and create a reel, story, or post, make sure to tag the Dyers Guild so we can see it and share it with the world. Thank you very much for following along. I'm very excited to see what you come up with. Until next time, find your line and craft your piece.